All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of something I haven't done before, kind of. This is going to be my review of the new adventure book from Wizards of the Coast, Candlekeep Mysteries. Reviewing books is kind of a new thing for me. Um, I did do the review of Tasha's because that really kind of fits with what I do on this channel with D&D deep dive and everything, because it was a source book, and I went through all the D&D deep dives on all the different classes and everything in here. As far as adventure books, if you're not aware of the kind of two kinds of books you can get for fifth edition D&D, you have what are called source books, which generally will give you options for playing the game. You have ones that are more player focused, like Tasha's tended to be a little more player focused, though there was a lot in there for DMs, or like the player's handbook is very player focused, and then you have ones that are a little bit more DM focused, like the DM's guide, the monster manual, Volo's guide to monsters, things like that just kind of give them more tools that they can use. Adventure books, on the other hand, are exactly that. They are pre-written adventures. Generally, most players won't get a ton out excuse me, won't get a ton out of owning all the adventure books. Most adventure books will add a few things in that are useful for players. Like sometimes they'll add backgrounds, or like in the Elemental Evil book, which for the life of me I can't remember what the title of the book was. Princes of the Apocalypse. I have it right here. In Princes of the Apocalypse adventure book, they actually had new spells and things like that they added to fit with the elemental theme. So some adventure books actually have some benefits for the players beyond having the adventure. But for the most part, adventure books themselves are generally only useful for, or mostly useful for DMs. And that is relatively true about Candlekeep Mysteries. The big difference between Candlekeep Mysteries and something like Prince of the Apocalypse or Curse of Strahd, any of the other more recent adventure books that have come out, is Candlekeep Mysteries is not in itself a campaign. The rest of these are generally campaigns that can take your players generally from around level 1 to 3, depending on the book, all the way up to around level 10 to like 13-ish. With the first two adventure books that 5th edition released, Horde of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat, actually supposed to take your characters from first level all the way up to anywhere between 17 and to 20, depending on how many other things you did in addition to what was in the books. Candlekeep Mysteries, on the other hand, is much more geared towards enhancing a campaign that is already in succession. And what I mean by that is Candlekeep Mysteries has a lot in common with the Sword Coast Adventurers Guide, in the idea that a fair amount of what shows up in here, other than the little mini adventures they have themselves, are a lot of lore and basically kind of world building for Candlekeep. Which, if you're not familiar with Candlekeep, Candlekeep is a fortress in Faerun. It's on the Sword Coast. It's actually, if you've ever played the first Baldur's Gate game, it's actually where you start. It's where Gorion was from, who is the guy that raised the main character for Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2. And what it is it's this fortress that is dedicated to preserving knowledge, specifically the written word. Uh, Everything in Candlekeep revolves around books. And so the first chapter of this book, which is, I have the digital version of it, so I'm actually not sure what the physical version is like. But the digital version, like the first chapter is meaty. There's a really, really nice map. If you get the physical version, they actually have a pull-out map that you get to keep, which is really, really nice. That has the entirety of Candlekeep, and it goes into not only like the layout. They have that really nice map. They explain each of the areas in there because Candlekeep is a decently sized fortress. And they also describe a lot of the NPCs that are in there as well. And things like how you get into Candlekeep. Not anyone can just wander into Candlekeep. You actually, even just to get into the, to Candlekeep proper, not even where like all the libraries and books are kept, just to get through the front door, you have to present them with a book they don't have already, or an exceptionally rare book. Like if you have like a first edition of a book and they already have it, but this is a rare one, or maybe you have a magic tome, a book on magic spells and the things like that, but it has annotations and the things like that from a very well-known or very powerful wizard or sorcerer or something. They'll take that because there is a unique value to that. But yeah, Candlekeep doesn't open its doors for everyone. And so that first chapter is really, really great for any DM that's running games in the Forgotten Realms, because Candlekeep is such a cool and interesting location, and it tends to be kind of overlooked because it is very, very self-contained. It's not Baldur's Gate. There aren't big wars or anything that have been fought there. However, the first epic adventure, which if you're not familiar, an epic adventure in the D&D Adventures League is actually an adventure where multiple tables work together towards the same goal. I've run epics at some of the conventions I used to help out at, and I've actually played in epics. They're a ton of fun. They generally have the ability for people at different tables to interact in limited fashions. It's super cool. But the first epic for 5th edition, back when it was called D&D Next, was called The Defense of Candlekeep, I believe. And what it was you were in Candlekeep and you had to defend it from a Dracolich attack. And each table would be given a different part of Candlekeep that they had to go and secure. It was super, super cool. So that part, from a lore nerd perspective, that is really, really cool. Another thing this book does really well is it does actually reference the fact that, okay, if you're not playing in Faerun and you want to add something like Candlekeep, so you could use these adventures, they give references to other well-known campaign settings that have already been published by Wizards of the Coast. They have one for, they actually have 2 different ones for Matt Mercer's world. They have one on Tal'Dorei and one in Wildmount. They have one for Eberron, because that's been published a lot, and then Oerth, which is the world of Greyhawk. They mention where Candlekeep might exist, or an equivalent to Candlekeep at these other places. So even if you are not running a campaign set in Faerun, you can still get a lot out of this, and they give you little tips on how to insert a Candlekeep like a Candlekeep-like area into your own campaign. So overall, I really, really like that. The adventures themselves are really interesting, to say the least. They are spread out. There is a total of, I think, 14 different adventures. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Am I reading that right? Maybe there's 17 and I just didn't realize it. But they go from levels 1 all the way up to, I believe, the top one is 16th level. Yeah, so there's 17. And I believe there's 2 for first level, or maybe it's second level characters. Yeah, there's 2 adventures for second level characters, because first level characters, literally one adventure and you go from first to second level. Like there's almost no way you can stay at first level after one adventure. It's not possible. But yeah, so they have 2 second level adventures and then 1 each for third, fourth, fifth, all the way up to 16th level. And they're really interesting. I have not read through every letter of every single one. Some of them I've just kind of breezed through, read kind of the talking points and the basic kind of overview of it, and then looked at some of the specifics. But there have been some that I have really dug into. It's one of the reasons it's taken me about a week to get this review done, because there's a fair amount to read here. And reviewing a source book for me is a little bit easier than reviewing an adventure, just because there's so much more to an adventure that you have to look at. Despite the fact that most adventures are smaller than source books, there's a lot contained in those smaller amounts of pages. So yeah, the adventures themselves are really interesting. They will all start off with kind of an elevator pitch of the adventure. And all of these adventures involve the party finding a book. Some of the books are actually located in Candlekeep. Some of the books they may discover in just on their adventures. They may discover a book, and it will lead them to Candlekeep. A lot of these adventures, while they are all linked to Candlekeep in some way, shape, or form, and a lot of them will have you at least visiting Candlekeep from part of it to get information and the things like that, because it is the best source of information in all of Faerun. But a lot of them take you away from Candlekeep. There are a few that take you into demi-planes and things like that. There's some that actually take you to other planes. But they're all really interesting. As far as how they're written, they're really simple as far as running them. I don't know how long most of these are page-wise, because again, I'm reading this digitally, so it doesn't break it down by page for me. But none of these adventures look like they would run much longer than maybe 4 hours, which is a kind of average runtime for D&D adventures, around 4 hours. And if you need to run a little bit faster, some of them you might be able to. Otherwise, chop it up into a couple sessions. My sessions themselves tend to run around to 2 hours. So one of these adventures I would run as probably as to 2 sessions. But they're well written. I believe all of them, or at least almost all of them, will have multiple maps in there, which are really useful. Again, especially if right now, because of everything that's going on, most people are still not doing in-person stuff. So having these maps in the digital version means I can literally just copy the map and upload it to something like Roll20, and be able to run all of these adventures with full maps that are already gridded and everything you need to be able to play them without really any difficulty. Anytime they have a map, they will have a player version of it where the DM's version will have labels and notes and everything, so you can look at that and not be completely lost when they're adventuring. The player version will just have like the walls and everything like that, and you kind of go from there. But they're really nice. The maps are gorgeous. In addition to that, anytime they have, and I'm not sure if this is something they've been doing with adventure books for a while now, because to be honest, I haven't read many. I've been running all the D&D I run is homebrew stuff in my homebrew campaign settings, so I have not used an adventure book in years. However, something they do in this is they any NPCs that you as the DM are going to have to deal with, and the players are going to interact with. They will give you the name. They will give you, their basics. Like this is one. Their name is Madrina Natarask. They're a lawful good human creature that I won't reveal because that's a spoiler. They'll give like a brief description of the character, and then they will give personality trait, ideal, bond, and flaw. The same things you would have on a character sheet to just kind of help you to be able to kind of play these different characters. Which, again, as a dungeon master, this is really useful. I know in earlier adventures, they might have, the name, and they would kind of describe him the first time they introduced the character in the adventure. But a lot of the times, that character might show up, 3, 4, 5 times during the campaign. And you'd have to always go back and look them up, and they weren't really set up to be played. They were set up in a more narrative focus. So this was just these bullet points of this is them, this is their thing, this is their trait, ideal, bond, and flaw. Really makes it very simple to just kind of turn the page, go back and go, okay, this is the character I'm playing right now. And if you have a paper version of it, depending on how you feel about writing in books. Some people are very against it. I don't write in any of my books. But if you don't mind putting notes into the things in the adventure when you're running, or if you photocopy it or things like that for your own personal use, I have to say legally, and make little notes and things like that with like, oh, I use this voice for this person, or I look out of the top of my eyes. It can be a very useful, simple tool to be able to not have to worry so much about the NPCs and forgetting aspects of them. You just have that page available to you. So I really like that. The adventures themselves, are interesting, I guess would be the best way. None of them, at least none of the ones that I've read completely, none of them are adventures that I would say are just bad. Like there are certain D&D Adventure League adventures that I would tell people flat out, do not run these adventures. They're poorly written. They're not fun to play. All of these look fun. I haven't run any of them, so I can't be 100% certain they are fun. But from my own knowledge and experience, they look fun. They're interesting, which is something that you really want out of a hardcover adventure. Because if a hardcover adventure is just going to be a really kind of basic dungeon crawl, you can do that yourself. You really don't need to spend money on a book to make a dungeon crawl. Just buy a set of maps from the billions of places that offer maps online. And then, insert in encounters. And you can buy random encounters and find tons of them on the line. So you do want your adventures to be interesting and unique and kind of challenge the players in a lot of different ways. And I gotta say, a lot of these do. They give you really interesting. They will give you kind of what the character's goals should be in this, and then at the end of most of them, they'll have a little wrap up where they go, okay, if this happened, then this is how it ends. If this happened, then this is how it ends. The one that I find most intriguing, and the one that I'm actually looking at right now, is called Book of the Raven. It's written by Chris Perkins. If you're not familiar with that name, he has worked for Wizards of the Coast since the 90s, I believe. He is a brilliant dungeon master. He has written half the stuff that has been published by Wizards of the Coast. His hand is on like 4 or 5 different adventures in here. He didn't. He only wrote one of them, but he directed and edited a lot others. And he's a brilliant guy. He used to be pitched as the DM to the Stars because he was the DM for Acquisitions Incorporated. Anytime Wizards of the Coast would do a promotional event or anything like that, where they would get celebrities to come play D&D, they would get Chris Perkins to run it. Now that's been shifted a little bit more towards Matt Mercer and I can't remember the guy that runs Acquisitions Incorporated any more. It's not Chris Perkins. He put that down. Anyway, Chris Perkins is amazing, and Book of the Raven is really interesting because the adventure itself is very, very open-ended. It is designed to be a jumping-off point for your own adventures. It is not designed really to be a self-contained adventure. And from what I'm seeing, it is unique in this book. In that fact, most of the other adventures in here are very much self-contained and the things like that. It's one of the reasons I love Chris Perkins' writing in general. Is he's very, very good at giving you kind of directions and options, but allowing you to go whatever direction you want, which allows your players to have a lot of freedom of choice. Whereas a lot of these other ones are going to kind of shoehorn your players into certain things just so the adventure can keep going. It's not a bad thing, and it is significantly harder to write adventures that don't have at least a tiny amount of railroading to get you to the next plot point. So it's one of the things that Chris Perkins does so well. But yeah, overall, the adventures themselves are really interesting. They're fun. Some almost every single adventure has new monsters. So even if you're not going to run these adventures, some of the new monsters they introduce here are really inventive. One of the adventures is full of monsters that are items, things like Rug of Smothering and animated brooms and other things like that. That's and mimics and all these other things like that to basically and it's a this particular adventure is one of the lower level adventures. It's a brilliant way to kind of introduce your players to the idea, especially for new players, the idea that nothing is ever as it seems in the world of D&D, especially when you're dealing with magic. And so I absolutely just adore just how many surprises are built into that particular adventure, and just the book itself. The other thing that's really, really nice about this book is just the sheer number of people that wrote for it. Some of which have never actually written for Wizards of the Coast before. Some of them you may recognize their names. The ones that jumped out to me immediately, Mark Humes is a very, very well known dungeon master. He runs a few different live play shows on friend of Matt Mercer's. If you're only familiar with D&D through the lens of Critical Role, you'll know Mark Humes in that way. Amy Vorpal, who's a former Geek and Sundry host, now does so many other things. She's a writer. She's apparently worked on the Newsroom, the Mindy Project, and other things like that. Like she's an actor. She does stuff with the D&D every so often. She is a dungeon master, and she's a comedy actor. She's brilliant. She wrote an adventure for this, which I believe Chris Perkins was one of the editors for, or the director for that adventure. That was cool. They have these great little bios of everyone that wrote. Each adventure is written by a different author, which is something you don't generally see in a single book. Generally, a book is going to have normally a couple different authors were working on it, but they all work together. They'll all start to finish. They will all work on the same adventure, and these aren't. There's so much variety in storytelling methods. There's so much variety in theme, in content. Some of the adventures are much more kind of jovial and fun. Some of the adventures are much darker and serious. Overall, if you are looking for inspiration for one of your adventures, Candlekeep Mysteries has got it in spades. Even if you never run any of these adventures in there, some of the ideas they present and some of the ways they create problems for the characters to solve is really, really brilliant. And like I said, all of these adventures are designed to be kind of their own the thing that all start with a character finding a book. So if you do run homebrew stuff, you can very easily find an adventure like, oh, I have to run this adventure. And you can very easily insert it into your own campaign and just change a few things. If you don't have a Candlekeep in your campaign, just create a well-known magical library or something like that in one of the major cities in your campaign setting. Just have one of them have a library. It doesn't need to be a separate fortress where they always go out and do things. But the closer you make it to Candlekeep, the easier it'll be to insert that. But like I said, a lot of these don't take place entirely in Candlekeep. So you can have a lot of fun with it. So for final thoughts, I like this. I think it is an interesting book as far as adventure books go. I think it's well written. I think it's great that there are so many new authors and different authors that I generally don't get to read their materials that are in here. The monsters in here are phenomenal. There are so many interesting and unique monsters. I will probably use some of these monsters in my own campaigns, even though I probably won't use most of these adventures in any of my homebrew campaigns, because I have enough weird stuff to deal with in my campaigns without throwing more weird stuff at my players. But yeah, and the nice thing about it, again, it goes all the way from level 1 all the way up to level 16. So it doesn't matter where your what level your players are, you can find an adventure in here to give them, just to give up a little bit of nuance and originality. You know, if you want to, you know, try something a little different, or maybe you just need a break DMing, you know, writing all your own stuff, run one of these adventures for a session or two. They're fun. They're also great for just one shots. If you do want to run a one shot at your friendly local game store, if and when they ever open up again, or run it online, run it at one of the online conventions that have been going on. These are great adventures to kind of bring a party to get together on that doesn't need to have a huge history or anything behind them. So for DMs, I highly recommend the book. For players, you're not really going to get a ton out of this book. I highly recommend not reading the adventures if you plan on playing them, because a lot of the most interesting aspects of the adventures are spoiled if you know how everything works. Even if you're like me and you're really good at kind of compartmentalizing what you know versus what your character knows, you're just not going to have as much fun if you read these adventures. And beyond the adventures, if you want to learn more about Candlekeep itself, it is really interesting. I think this is a little bit pricey for just a lore book about Candlekeep, though. And there are no player options in this book whatsoever. So if you are only a player, you can probably skip this book. If you're interested in going from player to DM, this is a nice book to do that with. I tend to recommend running something like a D&D Adventures League adventure, or something like this, a kind of short one-shot style adventure, if you want to dip your toe into DMing, because it's a lot easier to run than a full campaign or writing your own adventure. That can be very, very intimidating. This literally gives you everything you need to run any of your adventures right there in the book. You will only need this book, and probably the Dungeon Master's Guide would be useful, not necessary. Maybe the Monster Manual if you want to throw in some things. Again, because I have the digital version, I don't know how many any of the new monsters. The stat blocks are in here. For me, anytime I look at a monster, it shows up in red on my screen, and I can click on the name, and it takes me directly to the stat block, whether or not it is in Candlekeep Mysteries. So I'm assuming it would have most of the monsters that you need, and any of the other ones you wouldn't have, you can find in the basic rules or the monster manual with other things like that. But for the most part, these are self-contained. You can just pick up the book and run it directly from the book. So, and like I said, if you get the D&D Beyond versions, the one I have, it is super easy to go. Even when they describe the different areas, if it says, if it references another area, that area will be highlighted in green. You click on it, it takes you to the description of that area. It's got all the maps. I really like the D&D Beyond version. So if you are a player that wants to become a DM, or even just try DMing, you may never do it again, this is a great book to do that with. So recommendation, DMs, buy it. For players, if all you do is play, you can skip this book. The information about Candlekeep, you can find a lot of different places online. Maybe not quite as detailed and well written as it is in this book, but lore exists on like the Forgotten Realms wiki and the things like that. However, if you are a player that wants to try being a DM, this is a fantastic book for you to whet your appetite with. Anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, if you enjoyed this, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, so anytime I put out new stuff, you get it right to your subscription box. Also, don't forget to hit the bell icon and turn notifications on, so that whenever I do put out something a little different at a different time, maybe, you don't have to worry about missing out on it. In the comments down below, I'd like to know, are there any players out there that are watching this? Because most of my stuff is much more player oriented than it is DM oriented. Are there any players out there that after hearing my kind of review of this, you've decided that you want to try DMing and may use this book to do it? I'd be interested to hear. Or if you are just a player and don't want to DM, let me know what your thoughts on something like this adventure book are. Otherwise, again, that is all for me today. And I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.